Let me get everything connected up here. Great to see you, and sorry for a few minutes wait there. It's one of those days I remember in the very beginning of Bach on the Road having a bunch of technical problems, and we've largely steered clear of those until today. They wanted to bite me again, so really glad you're here and you stuck around. Wonderful to see you. And as always, for those of you on Facebook, the Nate's Violin Facebook page, I'm here to see and respond to what you have to say, comments, questions, and hi to all those out there on YouTube as well. Just know that I can't read your comments because I've only got the one screen. Wonderful. I see a question already from Diener, and I'll answer a question that no one has asked yet, which is where are we? And find ourselves today in Geneva. We're busy visiting some of the oldest cultural centers in Europe. So we had London and Paris were our last two stops, now Geneva, and I think you can see where we're heading to finish out this fun project. So this is in Geneva, Switzerland, and Diener has a question about playing and practicing sitting down versus standing up. So for everything I've been doing here, Bach on the Road, I'm playing sitting down. It's best way I can use the space that I've got here. Generally when I play solo, I stand, and that's mostly habit. It's how I grew up playing, and also just a little bit more freedom of movement. Perhaps most importantly, I find it easiest to maintain a good posture when I'm standing. Sitting can have the tendency to slouch. If you're disciplined, you can maintain that really long spine, which is the very best thing you can do for your playing posture. When you're standing, for me, it's a little bit easier to do that. There are cons to standing too. My stand partner for life, my wife Akiko, prefers performing seated. Just it feels like she's a little bit more centered that way. She takes her auditions that way if she can. So it's really personal preference. As far as the hours that I put in with the instrument until recently, probably more of them were with the orchestra than solo, so I would have done more playing sitting down than standing up. But sound-wise, hopefully I practice and work so that there's no difference. And great to see so many familiar faces. Wonderful. Well, we are going to explore the E major partita. And, as with the last few pieces we've done, there aren't a whole lot of new concepts here. But this first movement, the Preludio, is maybe out of all the movements in the six sonatas and partitas, the most unashamedly virtuosic. Bach reused this music. There's as the opening part of a great cantata, so that has organ and strings, and it's so celebratory, and there's no way I can consider playing this very studious and serious way. I like being serious enough, but this for me is a combination opening fanfare, welcome to the piece, and straight violin showpiece. So I think it can go plenty fast, as long as the notes are clear. That'll depend on the space you're in, of course, as we've talked about before. And as long as you can lead your listeners through the harmonic changes, and this has some great ones, some surprises and some thorny passages for the left hand. Oh wow, Paula played the entire partita from memory for college junior year recital. That's a big task. I mean, to play any of these, well, to perform any of these sonatas and partitas, the whole piece, and especially to do it from memory, it's a big project. Sometimes it's hard to memorize a piece when it's really long, and other times it's the speed that can get you. Once this movement starts, this Preludio, it just doesn't stop, and so you have to be quite secure with memory and physically to know what's coming next. There are challenges for, plenty of challenges for both hands in this, so it's worth spending some time, and you'll probably have some questions about specific places. Everybody has to deal with the famous bowing pattern, which we'll get to very soon. Let me play the beginning basically up through that section. My right hand was more up to the challenges there than my left hand was. We're going to have a little talk before I play the whole movement through. So you can see and I can see what we're up against. And that's a fun bowing pattern. But boy, I've gone my 10 rounds with that one. Let's spend a little time talking about that because it's one of the first things every violinist thinks about when they're looking at this movement. Progress on this bowing pattern, if you're not one of the lucky ones who just, you can do it right out of the box, progress on this is rarely very linear. So if you're working on this, if you have worked on this and it hasn't quite centered for you, don't worry, you might not be so far away from just getting it. Usually what happens is you kind of work and work and work and it seems like nothing's changing, and then one day, light bulb, and you can do it. So the pattern, right? A little bit like the Jeopardy theme, right? But we've got 3 strings. Perhaps it's not worth thinking too much about, but the reason that this is difficult is because the hand has to trace kind of a diagonal little figure 8 or infinity sign, if you want to call it a figure 8 turned on its side or infinity. But when I say that progress is rarely very linear, what I mean is that most people don't find success just starting with this slowly and gradually getting it faster. That will certainly help up to a point. There are a couple of problems with that, though. The biggest one is that unless you're really vigilant about it, when you practice it slowly, you're likely to remain on one string with a straight bow and then change. Here I'm exaggerating that a little bit. I'm really staying on one string level and then quickly changing to the next one. As I say, if you're not thinking about it, that may be what you do. And unfortunately, that's not at all what your hand needs to do to play this quickly. When you play this quickly, your hand is always going to be in motion going to that next string. So when you practice this slowly, that's exactly what you want to do. Almost to the point of blurring the strings. That's one of the first things I would suggest you do. Of course, eventually you don't want them blurred, but to get that sense of constant motion, that you're never just sitting on one string level. As far as the arm, it's going to go between this double stop level and this one. So it won't traverse 3 strings, but just these 2 double stop levels. If you've been with me in this project, you remember that we've got 4 individual string levels, 3 double stop levels. So the arm's going to be basically... So that's the other preparatory thing to do. That's basically the motion of the arm. It's not a lot. At that point, you can see how much mileage you get out of increasing the tempo. You can do that on your own without a metronome. You can do it with the metronome. Problem doing it with the metronome is that you can build in some sloppy habits with the arm because you're hell-bent on matching up exactly with the click. This is the kind of thing I would prefer that you get a feel for, even if it's slightly uneven, because what we're going to do in a second is some rhythms to help even it out. You know, while you're here, you may as well try it with the reverse bowing as well, starting up. It's the same thing, just the reverse infinity sign. Some people have better luck that way. Even if you don't immediately have better luck that way, it may open your senses, your body, to the kind of motion you need. It's worth a try, and it's great simply to be able to do it both ways for when some other patterns may come up. As I said, at a certain point, you're probably going to get close, but it may be uneven, right? Something like that, a little lopsided infinity sign. And so in that case, you can deliberately do rhythms like... or... And it's okay to... You can see that if I don't put in little accents, I'm quickly going to work my way up the bow. So it's fine to accent the short notes. In this case, the up bows, or accent the down bows if you're doing the opposite rhythm. Then, in fact, you can play around with different accents without trying to change the rhythm. So I'll play accent the first note of every 4. That's kind of the easiest. While still keeping an even rhythm. The second note of the 4. The third. And the last. And if you can do those, or even get close with those, chances are you're really, really close to getting it smooth. Before I take questions on this, I do want to mention that when you've gotten pretty good with the pattern on open strings, it would be great to say that your work was all done. Unfortunately, we've got another factor here, which is the left hand. And the very first chord that you've got, we've got the D and A strings covered, an open E string, and we're fairly high up in position. So what that means is that that E is going to be standing straight up, got no fingers on it. It's going to be high, whereas the string right next to it, the A, is going to be lower than usual because we're covering it up high in position. So all the nice hard work you've done is not wasted, but you will have to modify things slightly because of the fingers you've put down. And those fingers are going to change the whole way, all the way down to the bottom. The nice thing is the E always stays open, so the E doesn't change height, it's just the other 2 strings that do. Now let me see what you've got to say. And Peter, and that was exactly your question. Yep, about the string crossings there. Maggie wants to know about the beginning. Great question. Robin mentions that it's easier to play faster than slower, and that for many people is true. I think that is probably true for me as well. And I say if you can skip right to fast, go ahead and do it. At some point, you can always come back and figure out the control at different speeds, but this is a fast movement. So if you can do it fast, put your effort into some other things that need work. Courtney counted all the notes, and there are 4,402. Oh, in this entire partita. I was going to believe there were 4,000 in just this first movement, but in this whole partita, okay. Are you counting double stops as one note or two notes? I'm curious. I see Burchard. Great to see you. And Fred, I was late too, so don't worry. Hi, Kirsten. Donald, you asked, do I change fingering on the last beat or bar of the pattern to avoid the shift? So I'm... I just go ahead and do the 1-1 there, because we're in second position. And then I just do a 1-1. But it would easily be possible to go to first position here, or at least second. And now first position. On paper, I like that better, actually. It's not what I'm used to doing, but it might be a nice change. And Charlotte, you ask about stopping the open E string, which is, on my setup, as with many of yours, it's going to be by far the most brilliant string. Here, it's a steel string I've got, as opposed to the other three that are gut core with metal winding. The answer is, I think it's written to be brilliant for one thing, so I don't have to try too hard to prevent it from sticking out. I think it's written that way to be brilliant. I mean, it wouldn't have sounded quite so brilliant on the old setup, I suppose. But you can also play that string just a little bit lighter, and that we've been doing throughout all these Bachs. First note of the A minor sonata, for example. We're leaning more on the A string than the E, otherwise you get... And you're just kind of fire hosed with that metal sound. So with this, it's nice that they appear on up bows, right? So I think that's part of the evening out process, Charlotte, is just finessing the pressure on that one a little bit so that it's not quite as great, perhaps, as the other strings. Lauren asks about the transition between 16 and 17 bowing wise, because we've got going from a 2-string pattern to the 3-string, and if things are going to get weird, it's probably going to be right there at the seam. So that would be that going over that bar line is exactly what I would practice. I might do just the last 2 notes of the previous bar and then the first 4. And then the last 4 in the first 4. Gently expanding it. Last 6, first 4. Last 8, first 4, sorry. Last 8, first 8. Etc. Because I found that I usually started, right on the seam, and then you can have some weirdness transitioning from one to the other. But I think if you imagine where your arm is going to be, for the previous pattern, your arm would be parked on that double string level, and your hand would be going between the 2 strings. As soon as you start the 3-string pattern, your arm starts alternating. So now the arm, and that may help so that your arm doesn't get stuck at that lower level. Robert, you say this movement is similar to the double presto in the B minor. In terms of the anxiety it inspires. Relentless 16th notes without any rests. Feel like you're playing the whole movement holding your breath. Yeah, so of course, as with any piece, there are physical aspects and mental aspects. To talk about the physical ones first, it's imperative that from the early stages in this, you look for ways to do it with less effort. And we're going to talk about that in the beginning. I haven't forgotten about that question. Looking for ways to do this with less effort so that you're using only as much bow, for example, as you need, and not playing your maximum dynamic all the time. It's tempting in music like this because we don't see a lot of dynamic markings. We've got some pianos and some fortes to let us know when to do echo type effects. But for most of this, no dynamics, and so it's tempting just to get tunnel vision and play the same dynamic. And because it's fast, that dynamic is probably going to be loud. Loud and fast tend to go together. So to separate those, to play fast, but to allow the sound to relax. In order to shape. That always makes the playing sound more brilliant anyway, because the listener's ears stay fresh. So there's that in terms of the physicality and the shaping. And then mentally, yes, any piece that I look at and I say, oh, I've got, hundreds or thousands of notes without a break, what am I going to do? That is a really terrible thought to contemplate. So I've got to go, for myself, I've got to go from checkpoint to checkpoint. There are probably going to be sections of this that feel more comfortable than others. For example, once you get this bowing pattern, these are actually pretty comfortable sections, and same with the other one, though. Again, I'm going to wait for lightning to strike me when I play this through. I'm going to do something in those sections to show you that it's not very comfortable. But, in general, those are sections where I feel like I can enjoy the chord changes. And so, rather than thinking, I've got 4 pages of 16ths, no, it's half a page to get to that first really fun section, and then I've got a series. Another one. Almost anything in this can and should be broken down into at least note groups, if not phrases in series. And so, it's the same thing that you would automatically do if you were telling a story or telling a joke. If you just thought about how many words you had to say in the story, it would be terrible. But once you think, okay, this joke, it's got 3 characters in it, right? There's this guy, that guy, and the third guy. We set the scene, talk about each of the 3 guys, and then there's the punchline, and that's the structure. So once you do that with a piece like this, then it's just about finding those technical moments like that bowing seam we were talking about that might still give you trouble. And hopefully there shouldn't be that many of those types of moments in a piece like this, and you deal with them slowly, one at a time. Good. Nathan Lawrence, if you'll clarify your question, which place you're talking about, then I can answer it. Let's talk about the very beginning. And Peter, you mentioned something interesting that I hadn't thought about, that the first notes of the piece seem never to return, or that figure. And I haven't thought about that. When I play it through, now I'm going to be looking for that. Bach may have hidden some things in there that I didn't see yet. As far as starting it, I used to start this one up bow. Now I like the articulation, the brilliance of a down bow. But I should be able to make both of them sound the same. just starting down bow, I don't have to hook anything. I'm surprised at how many people don't find their first note for this one. Some of us maybe were taught that it's kind of a dirty playing or a dirty trick or something to find the note. Maybe we believe that we should be able just to put the hand on and know exactly where it is. And yeah, we should. There are plenty of times in the literature where you have to do that. My feeling is that if it's the first note of a piece and it's got to be in tune, I want to be sure that it's going to be in tune. Now, I have my own dirty little secret. I can look at the string and know exactly where an octave above the E string is. When I'm staring down the barrel of my instrument like this, just about the place where visually the neck and the rib intersect, for me, that's just about exactly where the octave above the open string is. So I don't actually have to do a pluck or play it, because I know exactly where that is. If it were some other note, I might, let's say it was a G to start. What I might do is place my 2 on that octave above the E string, and then I'd place my 4. And that's how I'd know where a G is. But if I weren't sure, I would absolutely find it, pluck a little or put the finger down on the string so that only I could hear it. It's not worth, I've heard people start this thing off and they're way off, and I just want to do the time machine and go back and tell them to find that first note. So you can also, if you like, find the octave below this E, match it with your open E string, and then placing the 4, you know where the 4 is. Start it from the string. So this would be a marcato or martelé start to the note. You set the bow with a certain amount of pressure. By releasing it, that's what gives you the articulation. Any of those down bow on the E string like that, I love to imagine that my pinky, or the pinky side of the hand, is creating the articulation. I don't want to be pressing with the first finger side of the hand. That's going to result in a scratch. The pinky side of the hand. These eighth notes, yes, I want them short and marked, but I'm not thinking about stopping each note. That's going to stop the ring, first of all, and likely make a noise, right? So I just think about the articulation at the start of each note. So for each note, I set with a little weight, release it for the note. Let's see what you've got. We're going to get to those strange keys and how to hear them and play them more accurately. Michael mentions C sharp major, things like that. We'll get there. And yeah, let me play a little more. Maybe actually now is a good time to play the whole thing, because I do want to get a look at the Loret as well. All right. So I forgot to have that talk with my left hand, but all right. I think it knows what I want. right, fanfare. And then you want to leave enough in the tank for the rest of the piece. The very next notes you play, if you've if you've got that lactic acid burning in your arm at this point, then so you'll usually see people take a nice fix their hair or whatever after the Preludio. Let's see if there are questions. The bow hold. It's maybe something I haven't spoken much about in this series, actually, but perhaps that's because I don't place a whole lot of importance on it, except to want to have something fairly neutral. In general, I like my hand to look on the bow as it might look just sort of hanging down, around the same spacing, no finger sticking out from the rest or bunched up. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, for me, the thumb, someone was just asking me about this yesterday, actually, but my thumb is approximately even with the second finger, the middle finger. It's pushes up into the leather of the bow. I don't have it anchored on the ebony of the bow or in the space next to the ebony. It's just solidly on the leather, nice and cushy. I can push it up to get the leverage that I need. But yeah, basically the four fingers about evenly spaced. And that allows me basically to deliver the bow where I like and to distribute the weight as I like. The more you have a finger separated from the rest, the less mobility you have to distribute the weight side to side. Now, when I bring it back more even with the other fingers, I could, as you can see, pronate or supinate the forearm. Now, you won't actually see that happening when the bow is on the string, of course, because if it did, then the bow would come off. But that's how you distribute the weight, either more toward this side of the hand when you're in the upper half, lower half more toward the pinky side. So you can imagine gently grasping a doorknob and turning it one way or the other, and that's the relationship the hand should have with the bow. The fingers are the only connection that you have with the bow, and therefore the bow to the instrument. So I want them to be fairly passive so that the motions of the arm, the path that the arm takes, is just transmitted to the bow through the fingers. And when things are really going well, the great feeling that you should have is that the bow is moving and your hand is actually following it. That's kind of a cool thought or a sensation to try to feel while you're playing, that the bow is on its path and your hand is actually following along rather than pulling the bow this way or that. So all of that is to say that I do nothing different in this movement than I would for anything else. A brief mention of this, if you haven't tried this, to teach your arm the path of a long straight bow, you might want an assistant at first when you do this, and you may want to do it over a carpet. But in any case, it involves holding on to the tip with the left hand and then moving with the regular bow hold, moving the fingers all the way up and down the stick. And as long as your bow is straight here at the tip, then this will show your arm the exact path and the other motions that it needs to take, right? That depending on the length of your upper arm, for a down bow, you will probably find that it goes back till about here, and then to maintain a straight bow, it'll have to come back in a little bit. The longer your arm, the less it'll have to do that. But out and then back. For the up bow, it's back first, and then forward again. And so you can teach your arm that path in that way. Now, Paula, you ask about open strings versus covering, like a fourth finger on an A string. And, in general, we know that the fingerings they used in that era were generally a lot simpler. For one thing, not only no shoulder rest, but no chin rest either. And so, you know, it was not at all usual to be shifting up and down. Now, Bach wrote high notes, of course, that could only be played by shifting, but those were meant to be the exception. I mean, most of the Bach sonatas and partitas you can play in first or maybe second position if you want to. There are problems that you can solve by going up into position, but they used lots of open strings, lots of first position fingerings, and their open strings would have sounded a lot more similar to covered strings. Those gut strings, they just weren't nearly as brilliant or as direct sounding. You have to remember too, whereas I use vibrato in Bach, hopefully sparingly, they would have used most likely none. And so again, the difference in sound between open strings and covered strings would have been much less. So it's worth playing in that style some, or at least close to that style, a lot less vibrato, a lot more first position. Something like that. There are ways I could shift around, but the sound would never be quite as open as that, with the longest strings possible. So I think in all of Bach, it's totally fine to play open strings. The exceptions might be if you had a melody, let's say, right, you'd want to keep that on a single string rather than doing this just for the sake of it. I have to think that even back then they wouldn't have done that. And Joanna, you mentioned kind of getting that perfect feel, and then all of a sudden you get nervous and it wants to desert you and nothing feels right. You know, that happens to me too. I mean, the last time I can remember it happening was pretty recently. You know, I did some travel and had to play the same day, and I got out on stage and I just knew it just didn't feel great, didn't feel right. I kind of felt like I was holding onto the bow rather than, you know, shaking hands and having a nice relationship. And yeah, it wasn't super fun. What I ended up doing was to focus on something else, the sound rather than the feel. And, you know, after a few uncomfortable minutes, hopefully the listeners, the audience didn't sense that it was uncomfortable, but after a few minutes, the sensation got more normal again. So that happens. It's a result of nerves. About the best thing you can do for that is to switch your focus every now and then. If you never allow yourself to focus on the physical sensation of the bow in the hand, the distribution of weight, then that's something you can deliberately focus on for a little bit. Find some exercises that let you do that. For example, playing only in the very lowest part of the bow and feeling that distribution of weight toward the pinky side. Trying different grip pressures, giving a number to them. Doesn't matter what that number is, but trying different numbers to see if you can fine-tune your awareness of how you're relating to the bow. But there's nothing you can do to totally prevent different sensations when you're nervous. They're going to come, but they'll go as well. I want to get a look at the Loré as well. The big difficulty in this is not starting it after the Preludio. Like many other of the partita movements, I think it's finding that balance of playability and dance. You know, finding a character that works as a dance while contrasting well with the first movement. It's not really a slow movement, is it? Not you know, so I've always loved to stay away from the I need a little bit more motion, I think, to bounce off those dotted beats. 2, 2, and it can certainly go even faster than that. Let me play the first half of this, and what I'm certainly going to do is have air in the sound. I need that after, you know, the concentrated. Try it a little slower than that and see what you think of that as well. But 2 voices in this. It's pretty simple. It's a far cry from a fugue. And so what I will chiefly do is have the accompanying voice a little bit shorter than the melody. So when the second voice comes in, I won't just play, you know, for me, that's a little bit too much like an organ. If the accompanying voice and then connect a little bit more in the melody. That's a way to separate the voices a little bit. Now, one thing you can't separate is the pitch of the 2, and this is not always the most easy key to play in. It's a brilliant key, and yet brilliant isn't exactly the character that we're after in this, right? There's a wistfulness to it. That's especially why I want to keep a good amount of air in the bow. We've talked about pitch in every one of the sonatas and partitas that we've looked at, but here's another example of horizontal and vertical intonation. Now melodically, I'd like a very close half step. But I have to be careful, because the higher I make that G sharp, the stranger it's going to sound. And then on the 6th beat of the first full bar, I have to play them together. Remember, thirds ring best when they're closer. In other words, when a major third is lower. So when I play that way, and it probably doesn't come through over the microphone, but I can actually hear that tartini tone, right? The mysterious third tone that comes from the difference in the frequencies of the 2 double stops. So when those are perfectly tuned together, I can hear a really low an E ringing along with those 2. I only get that if that third is nice and low. And same there, I hear it low, D sharp. But listen to that G sharp by itself. I don't want to play, yeah, got to compromise somewhere. I can play a high one first, not that high, and a lower one next to the E. I think you might notice that. I'm just going to play a lower one both times, and I'm also going to lower the A. Now, this doesn't ring with the open A string, but it's such a quick note, and it's a passive note. And then I can play that same low one here. Same here. Nice tight half step into the accompanying voice would be great. But then that sounds a little... I'm going to lower that G sharp. And so then sure, the accompanying voice, it's a wide half step, but it's a secondary voice. I don't think you're going to be too bothered. Well, you'll be bothered by that because that A was really high. No compromise allowed there. It's a perfect fourth. So, as long as I'm making decisions about what's important, what compromises are going to be worth it, what listeners are going to pick up on, then I can make intelligent choices. And, lest you think this is only after you've mastered, being able to play every note in tune, is actually doing this that helps you master intonation. So don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I'm just going to get plain intonation first and then I'll worry about really where every note goes. You can do that right from the start. And that's what fine-tunes your ear and helps you hear when things match and when they don't, and it gives you a richer understanding of the music. Let me see what you have to say about that. Now, Amrita, you ask about the left thumb, spoken about the right thumb, and you're right to ask about it because the most common place and the most common cause for tension in the left hand is that squeezing between the thumb and the first finger. And it can have a number of different reasons. There's, in the back of some people's minds, the fear of dropping the violin, right? So just wanting to have that control, that security over time, that can get tighter. It can be simply an incorrect hand placement or setup. If my hand is really more or less with my palm facing me, then that's going to jam that first finger side of the hand right into the neck. Not only that, but I'm going to have to adjust it every time I want to use a first finger. So, the setup of the hand, I want, just kind of fanning out a little bit diagonally from the fingerboard with freedom there. Now, I think what some people have a hard time coming to grips with is I have contact with the first finger 99% of the time when I play. If you're playing without a shoulder rest as I am, that's almost a requirement. You're just not going to be able to support the instrument very well with the big space there. Some people are actually taught to keep a space there all the time, which I can't understand. You may not need contact all the time as I do, but it's certainly not a bad thing. The bad thing is the squeezing, extra friction and pressure. So you can think, if you like, about 3 points of contact with the instrument. One of them is always going to be where it connects to you up here, which could be, you can call it the chin. For me, it's the collarbone, because sometimes I may take my chin off. The second one is always going to be the thumb. And the third one, down in the first few positions, is going to be that first finger. Some part of it anyway. So those are my 3 points of contact. Once I get high enough in position, generally fourth or maybe fifth position or higher, that third point of contact switches to be my hand against the rib of the instrument. But if I'm ever left with just two, for example, those people that really, they take everything off to play in the high positions, that gets a little squirrely. So when I'm playing up in position, I've always got my hand there, and I can reach whatever notes I need to up on the E string or whatever string it might be. I elongate my fingers to do that. I've got the 3 points of contact, and so when I'm coming down from these top positions, there's a transition from the rib back to the first finger. So right here I still have a space there because I'm touching the rib. I let go of the rib, first finger's now back on the instrument. That was sort of a C major scale. I think playing an E major has broken my brain. I can't play in C major now. But yeah, that's all the time when I'm doing that. I need to be aware, and you build this habit over time, aware of the pressure of the thumb and the first finger. I kind of want even contact, even pressure there, and as little as I can get away with. Great. As far as bowing for this, because Maggie, you have a question about it. Well, I have to confess, I don't have a set bowing for this one as much as I do with some others. What's important is the shape rather than the direction, so... as long as you decide what's the note of tension and release, then you should be able to do it in either direction, but certainly is a pattern that feels more comfortable at first to play than the other one. Let me play the second half of this Lore in a more relaxed tempo. I'll leave you with that, and you can be thinking about the tempo that you'd like to try in this movement when we come back next time on Wednesday. A little more on the contemplative side. We'll play this movement a little bit again next time on Wednesday, as well as the Great Gavotte and Rondo, often used as an encore by different violinists. Mostly the Gavotte, and then a little bit the minuets as well. That'll leave us one bourrée and one gigue to round out the piece. You may have seen already from me today an email about what's happening next week. So that is the Violympic trials in preparation for the Violympics running June through August. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just go to natesviolin.com. You'll see there right at the top of the screen how you can join up for the Violympic trials. If you didn't get a chance to read the email yet, go ahead and do that. I'd love to see you there. It's a chance for us to spend next week together as well, so that the Bach party's ending, but you can learn a brand new piece with me. I wrote a piece. It's it's gonna sound pretty silly coming after Bach, but it's the Violympic theme, and you can learn it with me. It's got different versions. You can modify it depending on what techniques you know and which techniques you don't know. It goes all the way from very basic to really quite difficult. So you can learn it with me next week during the Violympic trials. That'll be lots of fun. So look forward to seeing you back here, same time, same place, Wednesday and Friday for more E major. And then we're done with Bach on the road. Great to see you again. Thanks so much, guys.